Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. My name is Jillian Murphy. I'm the event planner here at Scale Computing. And today we have Frank Seal, Senior Systems Engineer at Scale Computing, and he is joined by Brandon Hartke, President at XFER Communications. And we'll be discussing Scale's HC3 Hyperconverged solution. A couple of quick housekeeping items. There is a Q&A box at the bottom right-hand side of your window. Please use that for any questions you have during the event, and we'll get to those towards the end of the event. Also, the event is being recorded, so if any reason you need to drop off or you'd like to share it with a coworker afterwards, we will send you the full recording later this week. That said, I'll pass the ball over to Brandon to introduce himself and get us started.
Thanks, Jillian. So, you know, at XFER for over 26 years, we've been really focused on helping our customers to have technology that allows them to be flexible and agile in the marketplace. And now more than ever, that is really a critical thing that customers have to be able to do. So we try to find the best-in-class products and create that and pair that with the best service experience possible. So with that, we've partnered with Scale Computing, who has a phenomenal computing solution and allows us to deliver that and allows for our customers to be very agile. So thank you all for joining us to hear a little bit more about Scale. Today we will have a drawing for 2 $100 Amazon gift cards. We will be letting everyone, the winners, know about that after the webinar. They'll be getting an email with those gift cards after the event. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Frank Seal, who's a Senior Systems Engineer at Scale Computing, to tell us a little bit more about the solution.
Thank you, Brandon. So a little bit about Scale Computing for those that may have never heard of us. We are the market leader when it comes to hyperconvergence in that small and mid-sized market there. We have more than 3,000 clusters worldwide, 10,000 systems if you add all of that up. Our office, we're headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. So right here in the Midwest, we do have our engineering and R&D team that is based out in the San Francisco area. Lots of partnerships, so we've created an ecosphere around the product, and in most of those cases, we're even first line of defense when it comes to support on these products as well. You may have never heard of us, but plenty of people have. We are one of the most highly reviewed and highly rated products out there when it comes to hyperconvergence. Whether you see us on SpiceWorks, Trust Radius, or even in the Gartner peer reviews, we have lots of reviews out there. We've won many industry awards across the field here, and the one that I'm most proud of is the CRN ARC Award that we won, where we've actually displaced VMware as top hypervisor, and I'll dive more into that our product is embedded with a hypervisor on there as well. So a little bit about what we're doing, hyperconvergence. Some of you may know what this is, some of you may not. We're the ones that kind of coined this phrase here, and to us it had that specific meaning. We wanted the servers, the storage, and the hypervisor all combined into one easy to consume, easy to manage appliance there. That takes a lot of the grunt work out of managing that system, maintaining it, and keeping it up and operational there. So most folks, when they do virtualization, and some of you may have this sitting in your server rooms today, this was what was called the 3-2-1. Typically, I'd have 3 or more host servers that would have VMware, Hyper-V, something like that on there. And then I would connect it to a pair of switches, and then I would have a SAN on the back end or a NAS as my highly available storage there. The issues with this is typically I've got all these different management points. You know, I'm managing server hardware, VMware, I'm managing SANs and switches, and then also a very inefficient data path where I've got to take 7 to 8 hops that my data from the virtual machine to finally rest at the SAN. So we wanted to modernize that and make it more efficient. So basically, we're running the VMs right on the storage, if you will. We embed the hypervisor right into that storage plane there, so that way that eliminates all those bus stops that you would typically see in a traditional virtualization layout here. This reduces the amount of time I have to manage, also greatly reduces any of that maintenance and patching that goes on in the future there. So you compare this to what other products do in our space when it comes to hyperconvergence. On the left, you'll see everybody else in the industry. You name their names, that's kind of who's over there. And what they'll do is what's called a VSA, or a virtual storage appliance there. And by doing that, they haven't eliminated the SAN. They've just virtualized it. And now it takes more bus stops to get to where I want to be highly available. It eats up my server and compute resources that I used to have on the SAN. So now I've got to buy bigger hardware. And we've created a very highly efficient means to eliminate all that on there. So that reduces the initial cost and increases that ROI with my hardware. When we built the product, we had 4 key elements in mind. You know, that simplicity, that availability. We wanted this to be able to scale out. Think of it as Lego blocks. You know, I can add on other nodes. I can mix and match from different families, different sizes, no hardware compatibility list. And we also wanted that affordability. You know, everything, all the cool stuff is typically for the large enterprises that have the bigger pocketbooks, and we wanted to build this for those small and mid-sized businesses in mind there. When it comes to platforms, we have a multitude of hardware platforms for you. Whether it is something like our 5000 series, which is those 2U nodes to get that density, a lot of the storage that I need, or the HC1000, which is probably our most popular family line there. It seems to fit the needs of the majority of the folks. But we've also got smaller, lightweight systems, whether they're half-depth servers, towers, or even these Intel NUCs for edge plays. If you have something that's edge-related, to where maybe I'm in charge of a large chain of grocery stores or gas stations, and I need just small amount of compute and virtualization at each one of those locations, and I don't have the space for it, we've got devices that can fit that need there for you. So a lot of key elements are baked right into the product here, where I don't need to go out and reach out to third-party vendors, buy more software, license more features. It's just included in the product. Things that a lot of us that are dealing with today, whether it's implementing a solid backup program, or, hey, now I've got to be able to utilize DR at remote facilities where I didn't think we'd ever have to do that. So baked right into the product, we have snapshotting that you can do locally on your virtual machines to create that instant restore process, and I'll show this a little bit later here. And also create that high availability, have multiple hardware failures locally within the cluster. The system just keeps on running. But I can also have those snapshots replicate to remote locations, whether it's a small remote office, whether it's another cluster, whether it's something like our partnership with Google when it comes to the cloud Unity piece. I want to replicate to the cloud and be able to fail over and run at the cloud. I can do that as well. Or if I want to use pre-existing hardware, whether it's NASs or small single towers, something like that, just to get my my snapshots and backups off site. We have all these baked into the product here. Speaking of those remote offices, we can do something as simple as those single node deployments. You know, maybe I've got the 3-node cluster at the headquarters, but I've got a sales office 2 cities over, and I'd like to have a file and print server, maybe domain controller, some simple things like that. I can set up a single node to run that and then tie that back to my existing cluster. So they're aware of each other, and then now they can back up back and forth between each other if I need to. I mentioned our partnership with Google. We call this HC3 Cloud Unity. I can directly connect to Google's cloud environment. It will extend my network, my VLANs, right into Google's environment, so I don't have to do some strange network translation. I don't have to run with different IPs. I can keep everything the same. That makes my cloud-based deployment very quick, and I can access it from anywhere in the world if I need to. This is all designed to be kind of consumable in different chunks to where, hey, I'm just pushing storage up there. That's a different cost than when, hey, disaster has struck, you know, the building's dark, we won't have power for another week or two. I can initiate and run my systems up in Google's cloud, and then it charges at a different rate. So I don't have to pay high rates when I'm not technically using the solution up there. So some of the advantages that we have against, you know, traditional virtualization or even other hyperconverged products. Again, we can fit any size that you need, very small, very large. We've got something to accommodate it all. There's a lot of intelligence in here. You'll see I have to do a lot less management with the product because of the self-healing that's in there. I'm not managing SANs and storage pools. I'm not creating multipathing. It's doing all that for you on its own. We've eliminated licensing. So things like VMware, I don't need those licenses anymore. The cost of those just keep going up, and then, hey, let's just eliminate them altogether. Support, we only offer one level, and it's 24/7 every day of the year, and our support is based at our headquarters in Indianapolis there. But most of it is I don't have to be a 5-time certified professional in a certain product to be able to competently run this, be comfortable, knowing that it's highly available right out of the box. And that I can survive in the event of disaster recovery scenarios with the product here. So enough with the slide pieces. Let's dive into the product and see what this thing looks like. So on my screen here, I have a typical 3-node cluster running here. This is all managed through a web browser. It's HTML5. I don't have to worry about plugins or Java or anything like that. But I just use an IP address of any one of the nodes that I have in the cluster. I don't stand up a management server that can be a potential single point of failure there. So I can manage it from any one of my nodes within the cluster here. Once I log in, this is the screen I'm presented. Up top, I've got a heads-up display showing me in real time, hey, what's going on in my cluster here. These first 3 gauges, that's all about my resources, my CPU, my RAM, my storage capacity. If I need more details, I can click on them, see if dedupe is saving us space, what's going on with more granular details here. These other 2 dials, that's about performance. Right now, we're doing just over 8,000 IOPS worth of workload here. So you can really crank out those performance needs if you need to. They can handle it for you. Any issues I need to know of, they'll be up here in the corner. And plus, this thing will send you emails to let you know if there's something you may need to look at. You don't have to sit in the user interface all day. These 3 boxes represent my physical nodes that I have in my environment. Right here is showing how my RAM is being used by my virtual machines. If I prefer to see the disk layout, I can switch to that view. But I find a lot of people over time say, hey, you know what? This really feels like it's my own private cloud. I don't care about the hardware anymore. It handles that on the back end, so they'll just minimize the hosts, if you will, and then focus on the virtual machines. So I've got lots of virtual machines on here. I've got them categorized by maybe who they belong to, applications, departments, things like that. So each one of these squares that you see here, that's a virtual machine. All the tools that I need to manage that VM, we've got it right around each and every VM. So hey, if something as simple as increasing the RAM on a virtual machine takes 3 clicks. In fact, about every task that you want to do takes about 3 clicks. We didn't want it to be diving into a bunch of submenus, multiple management interfaces. Let's simplify this entire process here. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll build a virtual machine, highlight some unique features. I'll set it up to replicate offsite. We can fail over to the offsite location, and we should be able to get this all done here very quickly. So a couple ways to build virtual machines. One is I can utilize templates here. You know, hey, I don't want to load Windows 2016 every time I want a VM. I can clone it out, rename it, resize it, boom, I'm done in about 5 seconds. For demonstration purposes, to me, that doesn't give you much. So I'm going to build it the long way. Let's do it from scratch here. So I'll hit the plus sign to create a new VM. We'll call this one, I can't talk and type at the same time. We'll call this one XFER demo. Description, you know, hey, this could be some kind of, we'll just use database. You know, anything that I want to be searchable in this filter here, I can put content in here. Tags, that's these blue categories that we have over here. So what I'll do is I'll just create my own category there. Is it going to be Windows? Is it Linux? What is it? Since we're building this from scratch, it's going to slipstream some drivers in here for us. How many CPUs should we give it? How much RAM? Let's give this guy maybe 18 gigs of RAM. Let's give him just an 80 gig C drive, maybe 200 gigs for some log files, or maybe a 3 terabyte drive for archive files, things of that nature there. And then what I'll do is make it server 2016. I'll have it load that disk, and then I hit the create button. That's it. That's all it took for me to build this virtual machine there. One screen, and it was done. One thing you might notice if you're used to things like Hyper-V and VMware and those things, I didn't have to do a lot of background research, right? I didn't have to go look to see where do I have 3 terabytes of storage capacity at. It's going to find that for me. It's going to make it highly available. It's going to distribute it across those disks so I can survive multiple drives failing within the cluster. I can survive complete node dying, going up in smoke. My virtual machine workloads will still operate in those type of scenarios here. If I want to fine tune this virtual machine, I can come in here and tweak things, you know, hey, maybe this needs to be on a specific VLAN. So maybe 112 is the VLAN that my database servers are on. Everything is quick and easy to access and adjust. If I'm happy with the virtual machine, let's hit the power button. Now, what's going to go on is the state machines that we have running within the environment. They're distributing that virtual machine's workload. They're looking at performance of the other virtual machines in the environment, and it's going to best place it for us within the cluster. I don't have to think about it. So it chose node number 2 right here for me within that environment. Now, I want to make sure that I actually have a running operational virtual machine. There is a console button right here. Launches a new tab, and we should see it kind of loading that Windows installer disk that I told it to mount there. So now we have a running real virtual machine for our environment here. Now we get into the fun stuff. Hey, let's see what this thing can do. One thing I will say before I jump into this, we have no licensing within our product. What I mean by that is all the features that I showed you, they come with every single one of our products. It's not that, hey, you bought the small business edition and you only get 2 or 3 things. You bought the enterprise, you get a lot more stuff. We eliminated that. That kind of annoyed us in the industry, and we wanted to change that. So you get everything. Even if we got new features that come out next week, guess what? You can download those via the update, and you get those at no additional charge as well, too. So let's talk a little bit about snapshots. These are fun, especially if you're used to something like VMware and their snapshots. With them, you've kind of got limits in what you can do with their snapshots. It's not VMware's fault necessarily. It's the fact that they're just using old, antiquated storage architecture. So we've developed storage that's unique to us that unleashes the potential of these snapshots. Now, if I want to, I can take snapshots and leave them around for a long time. So, in VMware, about a week, 2 weeks was as comfortable as I was allowed a snapshot to stick around, or else it just got too big on me there. So with us, I can take snapshots and keep them around for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months. It's fine. I'm not going to have that huge growth like you've seen in other products there. It has a lot to do with our pointer records and metadata that goes along with the snapshots there. I can actually take lots of snapshots if I want to. I know for a fact in VMware, take about 10 to 12 snapshots on a virtual machine, and it'll get very slow. With us, that's not an issue. If you want to take snapshots, take lots and lots. You can take over 5,000 snapshots on each and every virtual machine if you want to. I'm not sure the reason behind it, but you can if you want to. But the best part is how I can actually utilize these snapshots here. I can come in and say, hey, you know what? I need to update this database to version 2.0. I don't want to wait till after hours and take a snapshot and kind of deploy a copy of it, test it, try to validate it, all that good stuff. No, I want to be able to kind of do this during normal business hours. So I can come in here to my snapshots from any point in time, whether it was 2 minutes ago or 2 months ago. I can say, hey, you know what? Create an exact copy of my XFER server with all of its data exactly the way it was right here. So 3 clicks, and I wait less than 10 seconds, and now I've got a full-blown copy of my production server here. I can now come in and maybe disconnect that network or put it on a different VLAN to isolate it from the production system. Now I can test with this server and see how the upgrade goes. How long does it take? Scenarios like that. Create perfect sandboxes. I've seen some folks where, depending on what the virtual machine is doing, something like a web server, they'll do a complete, redesign of the website on a clone like this. Once they're done, they've validated it works. they'll just delete the original and promote that one into production. You can do that. I don't have to have that originator for my clone to live on. It becomes the original at that point in time. The other piece I can do with this as well is I can create schedules for these snapshots. I don't want to sit and click this camera all day long. I can come in here and there's a section here that says schedules. When I move to this, build as many schedules as you like. For example, I built this one here that says critical. So anything that I see is like an important server, I want it to kind of analyze and I want that to be kind of protected a little bit more robustly here. So a job I created here that says take a snapshot of a virtual machine every 15 minutes and then delete that snapshot after 4 hours. So that way I've got plenty of overlapping snapshots. It also does it at the top of the hour and keeps that longer. It also does it, early in the morning, keeps that even longer. First of the week it does one. First of the month it does one. So now I've got plenty of overlapping snapshots with that one schedule right there. So if this system, it's my database, it's really important to me. I come in here and say, hey, let's select a schedule. Let's use that critical routine, and then I hit update. That was it. 3 clicks was all I needed, and now I've got that system protected in as little as every 15 minutes there. Another great piece of those snapshots as well is I don't necessarily have to restore an entire virtual machine to make use of those snapshots. It's 11:30 and it's 11:30 and someone comes up to me and says, you know what, I was trying to access some files on there and it's asking me for Bitcoins. What should I do? Well, I don't have to go back to a backup from the middle of the night and lose all of the morning's data that has changed on that system. Instead, I can come into my snapshots and say, hey, maybe I found a snapshot that was 20 minutes prior to the ransomware infection. I can come in here, expand that snapshot, and I can say, hey, this 200 gig drive is what was impacted here. I can mount a copy of that drive to any virtual machine that I have in my environment here. So maybe I've got a server that's set up just for file restores, something like that. In a couple clicks and in 10 seconds, a copy of just that drive from any point in time will show up on any virtual machine I tell it to. So now I can copy a good copy of those files out and replace the existing aspect there. And I didn't have to get my backups involved. I didn't have to pull from a cloud or anything of that nature. Very quick, very efficient to kind of restore more granularly if I need to there. But let's take this to an extreme. Let's set this up to get it off site as well. So what I can do now is come into where it says remote clusters. And I can link different locations together. One scenario I mentioned was maybe I've got that remote office, that sales office across town. I can link directly to that. If I come up here to my browser and click on Robo, this is a single node that I have sitting over there. I manage it the same way. It's just one rectangle instead of 3 or 4. So feature set's basically the same. It's just, hey, the UI looks a little different there. I can link directly into Google's cloud environment and use that natively like it's a scale HC3 cluster. Last tab up here in my browser, this is Google's cloud. I don't have to learn anything new to now deploy and manage something in a stressful situation like disaster recovery. It's a native user interface. I know all the features. I know how to do this. I'm not reading from a binder on how I kind of fail over to a remote facility here. So once you link these sites together, they all become targets for me. So I can say, hey, you know what, this XFER demo, I would really like that to go to the Google Cloud environment there. So I just hit replicate. Right there, you just saw me create a disaster plan for that system in as little as 3 mouse clicks there. So every time that this system takes one of its automated snapshots, it's going to go ahead and compress a copy and send it across the link to that remote location, whether it's another office or whether it's Google's environment there. That was all accomplished very quickly. One more enhancement I can do with this as well. Maybe I don't want my remote location to be exactly the same as my local snapshots. Well, when I create those schedules here, if I look at this critical system here, I can edit the remote retention as well. So maybe this hourly one here, I wanted to keep the hourlies different at that remote site than I do locally. You know, I only keep it for 36 hours here, but hey, maybe at the remote site, I wanted to keep that for 2 weeks over there. So that way I'll have more of those snapshots off-site than what I do locally. So you can do that as well. Set different retentions for remote versus local within your environment there. So now this guy is set up to transfer data off-site. So if we go, and you'll notice I didn't tell that Google environment anything about this brand new VM that we just built. I didn't need to. It's handling all that hard back-end lifting for me here. So now if I go back to that cloud environment, we can see it's created this Frank tag for me. It's created a container for my virtual machine, and it should be bringing those snapshots across that link. We can see one is done already. So now, hey, I've lost power to my main facility. I want to do DR. I just come in here and say, hey, we'll just put DR in the name, hit clone and close. Yeah, I wait about 10 seconds, and I've just restored my virtual machine at Google's environment there. You can do bulk actions by doing a lot of systems all at the same time if you want to. So that way, you know, hey, if I've got 10 or 12 or 30 virtual machines, I can have it firing all those guys at the same time. So very quick disaster recovery restore process there. Now, let's talk a little bit about the storage piece here. This is unique as well. Again, we've created our own storage layer that we called Scribe. It's a storage designed for virtualization. So by doing that, hey, we're allowed to break the rules that most companies have to abide by here. One of those is I can mix and match hardware within a cluster. They can be different size nodes, different storage footprints, different generations of CPUs all within the same cluster. But also I can have mixed media within my storage here, and I get to pick and choose how I want to use that. So this is a mix of spinning disk and SSDs in each node here. Everybody else you see that does this, they're going to use that SSD as a write cache. Hey, it's fine. You can use it as a write cache if you want to, but maybe there's a better way I want to do this. So for an example, if I come to this 3 terabyte drive, it's probably cold archive data that I just got to keep around. Do I really care if it touches the SSD? Probably not. So I can come in here to that drive, and there's a section here that says heat priority. Now this is going to do that kind of auto tiering for you. If I keep it at number 4, which it considers normal, it'll say, hey, what are the hot blocks on this disk? And it's doing it at the block level on the disk. It doesn't care about the OS and the files on it. It's looking at the blocks. And it'll say, hey, you know what, out of this 3 terabyte drive, really only 2 gig of data is kind of hot. It'll place just that 2 gigs of blocks on the SSD, and the rest it shoves off to spinning disk. But I can say, you know what, I don't care if this thing touches SSD that much, turn it down something lower, or you know what, in this case, I'm going to turn it to a 0. I want this drive to be pure spinning disk. Don't ever touch my SSD there. Now, the OS disk on here, hey, I want that to be a little bit peppier, right? This might be a critical database system in my environment. So I can crank it up a little bit. I can crank it up a lot, go to an 8. That's absurd right there. A lot more of my data will reside on the SSD at that point in time. But the 200 gig database, man, that's kind of, hey, that's what's propelling our business here. So I want this thing to be insanely fast here. You can go up, there's 10, there's ludicrous speed if you want to. But for some reason, our engineers just said 10 wasn't enough, so they said, let's make them go to 11. So now I can do that. I can crank it all the way to an 11. And when I do that, I have pinned all of that data to be pure SSD. So now, if we look at this one virtual machine, I've got a pure spinning disk drive, a pure SSD drive, and one that's an ever-changing combination between the two. I did that quickly, very straightforward. I can understand it, and I didn't have to log into a storage interface to make that happen. I can do that and adjust that for each and every disk and each and every virtual machine if I so desire there. One other feature that I like to cover is system updates. This, nothing fun to look at. My cluster's up to date. But I'm from those environments to where, hey, I had big EMC SANs. I had all kinds of switching. I had a bunch of Dell hosts and VMware and HBA controllers and all that stuff. So anytime an update came out, say EMC pushed out a critical update to the SAN, I couldn't just go and apply that. I actually had to research. I had to read what the known issues were. Does that affect the other hardware that I have upstream in my environment? If it does, I may have to patch my host server first with a new firmware before I can apply that critical security update to the environment. And I have to make sure that is compatible with my VMware build and so on and so forth. It stretched out updates quite a long time. With this, if an update shows up in this window here, it's built for your cluster. That's the reason why this is an appliance model, is we know exactly what the hardware is. We can test against all those hardware platforms. So now when an update shows up, hey, it's compatible with everything that you have within your cluster there. It'll typically be bullet pointed out here, telling you exactly what's in that update. Like I mentioned earlier, if there's new features, guess what? That's rolled in there, and now I'm advancing the cluster and future-proofing it, those updates. I click the Apply Update button. It says, are you sure you want to do this? And I say, yeah. And that's it. I walk away. What it'll do is it'll live migrate all those running VMs off of node 1, and it'll balance it across the other nodes within the cluster. Once that first node is empty, it then applies the updates all the way up, from the storage layer to the firmware, the hardware, to the hypervisor, to the management suite. It does all of that in that shot. Reboots if it needs to, it comes back online, Then it does that health assessment, make sure it passes, make sure everything's fully functional. Once he does that, then it tells node 2, hey, it's your turn. And then it just migrates that virtual machine, migrates all those virtual machines back again, juggling them around. And it'll systematically work through every node within that cluster. So you don't have to sit here on a weekend and babysit it and keep clicking next, 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 watching the blue lines go across the screen. So we've eliminated some of the management nightmare with that as well. One other aspect I will cover is support. We only offer one level of support. It's 24/7. It's every day of the year. It's next business day on replacement hardware. We don't tier support. Hey, you bought the small biz edition, you can only call us on Wednesdays. We don't do that. And like I said, our support team is at our headquarters right here in Indy. Give us a call. You'll be on the phone with a tier 2 engineer in 3 minutes or less. It's not a jungle of voice responses to get through to the right team. It's not staticky music while you're on hold. Get right through, get those answers, get someone to help you out there. We have remote support tunnels baked right into the cluster here. So you call someone on our team and they say, hey, Bob, we can jump right on there and help you out. They'll give you a 4 or 5 digit number that you type in here and you click open connection and that'll create an outbound SSH tunnel to that engineer who then has command line access to the back end of the hardware, and they can go in there and resolve those issues for you. So that way, on-site response, virtual on-site response is how fast can you click that button there. So I think that covers my aspect from the demo here. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything. No, I think we're good. What I can do now is probably open up the floor to any questions that someone may have.
Thanks, Frank.
Any questions?
Yeah, we have a few questions here. So one question around that replication that you talked about a lot, it says, how often can replication occur?
Yeah, so you can vary that widely. I think the smallest time frame you can set is every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes to once a year if you want to. So that's the smallest chunk, is 5 minutes.
Okay. Another question here says, how do you migrate to scale from something like a VMware or a Hyper-V?
That's a good question. So there's actually a handful of different ways. 2 of the most popular ones is, one is I can actually, let me see here if I can get my mouse out of the screen here. You can actually come in and hit an import button. And what it'll do is it'll copy that virtual machine directly in and convert it from whatever format that it is. The downside to this piece was, hey, I have to power off the virtual machine some places. Uptime is king for them. So in scenarios like that, we have a tool called HC3 Move where you put a temporary agent on that virtual machine, and that works for physicals as well. And what it'll do is image it over to a kind of a container VM like I have here. And that way it's still operational during that conversion process. The only downtime that occurs is when I say, hey, go live onto HC3. And at that point in time, it powers off the original, applies the IP to the new HC3 VM, and it does a reboot to make sure that it's acknowledged in Active Directory. So you typically see maybe somewhere between a 7 to 10 minute outage when you utilize that tool.
Thank you. One other question that I have here is, how long will it take to add resources to an existing cluster? So I think they're talking about, more RAM, CPU, those types of things.
Yep. So typically this is, if you think of them as Lego blocks, I can add another node into the cluster that gives me more storage capacity. How much depends on how much you want in there, RAM, CPU, all those variables. I can add that to the cluster, hot and on the fly, and it takes probably 20 minutes or less. The longest part of that process is actually getting it out of the box and sliding it into the rack.
So would there be any downtime with doing that?
Nope, none at all.
Great. And the last question that I have here is, can I repurpose my existing hardware?
Not into the cluster itself, but what you can do is a lot of folks will utilize, if they have SANs or NASs, they can utilize that to connect the VMs via iSCSI, maybe use it as kind of backup targets. You can also set the virtual machines to do a complete virtual machine export from time to time. You can schedule that out. So that way it's kind of like a full virtual versus our snapshots are kind of more of a differential, if you will. So you can utilize them that way as a landing zone for backups and things like that. But the product was built to be more of an appliance with the hypervisor baked in and help streamline those updates.
Very good. Thanks, Frank. Those are all the questions that we have. So with that, we do have a offer for all the folks that have joined here today. There is a promotion going currently where with the Scale Computing platform, we can give you 5 years of support, and again, that's the Indy support along with the XFER support for the price of 3 years. So that is a current promotion that we have. If you have any interest in learning more about Scale, digging a little deeper, please reach out to your account rep or sales representative, and we'd be happy to take you through the solution in greater detail and talk about how it can apply to your organization and give you more flexibility in these times that we're in today. With that, again, we will be reaching out to the folks based on the drawing for the Amazon gift cards, and we thank everyone for attending and have a great day.
Thank you.